Now we're going to start printing. So I'm going to be using the black block printing ink, and I'll be using the bench hook as an inking plate. And then I'll be using what's known as a brayer or a roller to roll the ink out on here first and then transfer it over to the block now that my block is completely carved out. So I've got a palette knife or a putty knife that I'm going to use to spread the ink to try to make it even. If you don't have one of these, you can use like a plastic knife or a plastic spoon or something like that. I wouldn't use any of your good silverware because you don't want to mix art supplies and food. But you can use anything that you've got on hand. And basically, we're just going to go for the same, about a toothpaste size amount of ink. It might be a little bit tricky to see this because of the black ink on the black bench hook, but again, try to get about a toothpaste amount out. Close that. And then I'm going to take my putty knife and I'm just going to kind of spread this, try to get a nice thin, even layer all the way across. Find some place that you can set that palette knife back down. And then take your roller and we're going to be rolling the ink. So you want it to be not as wide as the width of the brayer. And we're just going to roll that out. And I'm rolling, lifting, and then pulling back and spinning. And then you can also go the other direction too. And you can see that the ink is starting to collect on top of the roller, but we want it to be nice and even. What we're looking for is you should be able to hear a little bit of a hiss, almost like sizzling bacon, but not a really, really strong hiss. If you've got a really strong hiss, then you've got too much ink. And then you want to look for something that kind of looks like an orange peel texture, but not too overly textured, because we don't want to over ink our block. I think that I have a little bit too much ink on here. It's a little bit too loud, and that texture is very, very large. So I want to thin down my ink palette a little bit. So I'm going to take my putty knife again. I'm just going to scrape some of that ink and then move it off to the side. And we can use that ink later, but I just want a thinner amount for my ink palette or my ink slab. Again, so you're trying to keep it the same width as the roller, going in both directions there. I think that's a little bit better. I'm going to put that aside, and now I'm going to roll over the top of my block. I'm not pushing down at all. I'm not putting any pressure down. I'm just rolling across the surface of the block. And this will give you a good idea of exactly how it's going to look when you print it. So again, not putting any pressure down, just rolling across the surface. And then you can put your roller aside. And then I always kind of pick my block up and kind of look at it with like the light on, because you'll see that highlight where the ink is. And if there's ever any like dull spots, that means that you missed a spot when you're inking, so you can go back over it with the brayer. Again, not putting any pressure down whatsoever, just letting the ink sit on the surface. And then I'm going to put my block back where it goes on the template. I'm just going to move this out of the way. I'm going to take my gloves off since I'm going to be handling the paper. I don't want to get any fingerprints on the paper. And then I'll move this so it's a little bit more centered. And then you want to print again on the rough side, not on the smooth side of the paper. And I'm just going to drop the paper down when I can see that it fits in that template that I made before. You don't want to adjust it after you've set it down, because there's already getting ink on the paper, and that'll just kind of smear and blur it. So once it's down, it's down. I'm going to use that plastic bag again, and then my wooden spoon to burnish it, and we should be able to see the image coming through the paper. So if you look, it's getting darker in those areas that I'm burnishing. So little circles around your image. I'm going really, really light at first, and it's really better to start in the middle of the paper. That way, if there's any wrinkles or anything, you can kind of push those out. As you're burnishing. And it'll probably take a couple minutes to burnish the whole block. If you go too light, then you'll have this kind of what we call saltiness, which is kind of like a white peppery texture in the print. And we want to get as nice, solid black as we can. And again, I'm using this piece of plastic because it helps the wooden spoon kind of glide over the surface better. And also because it's clear, so I can see through it. And also the ink can seep through the paper. And if the ink seeps through the paper, it can get on the back of the spoon and just make a whole big mess. And I also don't want to over burnish to the point that I'm like going completely through the paper. Alternatively, if you don't have a plastic bag, you can use a spare sheet of newsprint or even computer paper. You just won't be able to see through it quite as well. You can see my image is coming through pretty well. And when you feel like you're done, what you can do is you can just take like one side and kind of peek at it and see how it looks. And you'll notice that edge there, especially where that black ink should be really, really dark around the frame. It's salty. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. So you can see all that saltiness on the edge. So I want to keep going. So you can just push that right back down. And since I've already gone over the whole thing, it shouldn't shift around or move anywhere. And then you can go and burnish back that area some more. So that hopefully the next time I lift it up, it'll be a little bit darker. So let's take a peek at it again. So it's getting a little bit darker. If you're having a really, really hard time getting it, then you can go back with that roller again and put some more ink down in those areas. And then put your paper down again. And then re-burnish on those areas. So I'm just going to keep going across the whole thing. You want to do it relatively quickly because we don't want that ink to dry out while we're printing. And in this case, we don't need to spritz our paper at all because we're not trying to push the paper into the grooves. We're just trying to pick the ink up off the surface. Let's see if that's getting any better. Still a little bit salty, but it's getting better. So I'll go for a couple more minutes. I would expect it to probably take around 5 minutes or so. So sometimes it can be helpful to like put a timer or something down to make sure that you've gone over it enough times. But to make the video a little bit shorter, I'll make this my last pass. and I'll just pull it up, even if it is a little bit salty on mine. But so to try to get rid of that saltiness, I take a couple more peeks at it, keep burnishing it for a couple more minutes, and maybe even roll some more ink down. Just being careful not to touch the roller to the ink. It doesn't look like it's coming through the paper too bad, so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of burnish directly on it. And I'm just checking every now and then to make sure I'm not getting ink all over the back of my spoon. Okay, so we'll call that done, even though I probably want to check it and burnish it for a little bit longer. That's okay. So when you're done, you just pull the ink off your block, and then I like to check it to see if there's any changes I want to make. Now's a great time if I want to make any areas lighter. I can carve in a little bit more, so keep your tools on hand in case you want to carve in at all. This really gives you that good idea of how that reflection kind of looks comparing one to the other. Maybe I want to lighten the background more, I could carve in more to there, or something like that. So yeah, that's how we pull our relief prints. And the next video, I'll show you how to clean up.